Good afternoon, dear colleagues. We're happy to welcome you at the briefing of the Ambassador at Large of the Ministry of the Foreign Affairs on the crimes of the Kiev regime, Mr. Miroshnik. During today's event, you will hear the report. And after the introductory word of the Mr. Miroshnik, you will get a chance to ask any questions that you might have. And after this meeting, I would like to draw your attention to the fact that currently you're on the live stream and you can ask any questions that you might have. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Before presenting the annual report on the crimes of the Kiev regime in 2024, I would like to focus on some conclusions that become obvious after analyzing the array of materials on the criminal acts of both military and political structures of the Kiev regime that are united under the same guise, the military dictatorship of Zelensky. For the Kiev regime, the killing of children and ordinary civilians, women and the elderly, is a perfectly acceptable and universally used so-called means of pressure on Russia and personally on President Putin. Orders to nullify or in human terms to kill civilians, old and young alike, are generated by the Kiev leadership. These orders are sent down to the armed formations. They're diligently fulfilled and exceeded, supplementing the killings with bullying, sexual violence, threats, and humiliation. When captured, Ukrainian fighters admit that they were acting on the orders of the Ukrainian command when they shot and abused defenseless civilians. This does not exempt them from responsibility for their war crimes, but emphasizes the systemic disregard for the norms and principles of the international humanitarian law at the level of the entire criminal vertical of the Ukrainian government. When we learn of the killings and the violence perpetrated by Ukrainian militants, Ukrainian state propaganda agencies tend to present it to the radical Ukrainian audiences as some kind of victory or some kind of achievement without a shred of remorse. Rarely do they regret that information about their exploits in the form of irrefutable facts about murders, violence, and looting by Ukrainian Nazis becomes known to an international audience and can cause some resonance, which, however, their Western sponsors and customers immediately rush to extinguish, blocking any possibility of an independent investigation or fair assessment. In August 2024, after the Ukrainian armed forces made a terrorist sortie into the Kursk region, Zelensky, commenting on the behavior of Ukrainian fighters on the front line, said, direct quote, "Our people do not treat civilians, even civilians of an enemy state, like animals. We behave as human beings." When we receive data from Ruskaya Porechnya in the Kursk region about civilians tortured, raped, and shot at point-blank range, when we present facts about dozens of Ukrainian refugees killed by Ukrainian drones in Chasiv Yar, provide evidence of hundreds of residents of Selidova in the DNR shot by Ukrainian punitive units, we would like to say to Zelensky that there is no need to humiliate the beast in such a manner. The Ukrainian Nazis who committed these crimes are much worse than any scavengers because they commit horrible acts of violence quite consciously. They are direct continuators of the deeds of their ideological idols, the punishers and murderers of the Nazi Germany during the period of the Second World War. The established daily practice of the Kiev regime's militants is regular, deliberate, and targeted attacks on civilian objects and civilian population concentrations in the frontline zone. Meanwhile, it is extremely difficult to interpret the actions of the Ukrainian armed forces as indiscriminate attacks when the civilian population falls as a collateral victim of strikes on military facilities. It would be more correct to speak of acts of violence deliberately terrorizing the civilian population in order to create unbearable living conditions, as well as exerting some political means. In just 12 months of 2024, Ukrainian armed formations fired at least 87,885 munitions at Russian civilian objects. This is an average of 240 strikes daily, using the entire available arsenal of weapons supplied by the West at the expense of the taxpayers of these states, from long-range missiles to small arms. The most deadly and crippling type of arms used by the Ukrainian armed forces against the civilian population are NATO artillery shells of 155mm caliber with shrapnel, high explosive, and cluster warheads. More than 40% of civilian casualties, or more than 2,200 people, were killed or wounded by shells manufactured in the United States, Germany, or South Korea, paid with the taxpayer money from 18 Western states. The Czech Republic has been most active in finding and purchasing such shells from around the world to kill people in Russian regions. Today, the Czech president has an opportunity to report on his achievements in organizing the killings of civilians, as well as a number of other leaders of Western countries who sponsor the killings of the civilians by Ukrainian militants. Second, among the weapons most commonly used to kill and maim civilians are the attack drones. The proportion of civilians affected by UAV strikes doubled by the end of the year, with nearly 1 in 3 civilians affected. During the year, at least 1,481 civilians suffered from drone strikes, of whom 1,271 were injured, including 44 children. 210 people were killed by Ukrainian UAV strikes, including 11 children. I would like to note that in cases of attacks on civilians using drones, the militants almost looked directly into the eyes of their victims, carrying out deliberate lethal strikes. In total, in 2024, according to the most detailed data verified so far, at least 5,399 people fell victim to Ukrainian crimes, among whom at least 809 were killed. But this is only the tip of the iceberg. As territories are liberated from the presence of the Ukrainian regime and investigations are carried out, this figure will undoubtedly increase. Facts of mass murder, violence, and looting are being uncovered. As of right now, the death toll does not include at least another 350 civilians killed by Ukrainian militants in the territories that have already been liberated or are currently being liberated by our armed forces. Procedural actions are still underway in regards to those cases, and the bodies of those killed by the Ukrainian armed forces in those zones have already been found. Testimonies of their closest relatives have been collected. Places of many burials are becoming known, and the circumstances of their deaths are being established. The number of confirmed murders and other crimes will continue to grow. Speaking about the systematic and planned shellings of the civilian sector by the Ukrainian armed forces, I can note without a shred of doubt that the maximum density and intensity of the shelling had cynical, premeditated political motives and goals. The highest number of incoming attacks, reaching up to 410 per day, occurred in the first 10 days of August and was directly related to the Kursk sortie of the Ukrainian armed forces, when Zelensky and his sponsors urgently needed to show that the Ukrainian armed forces were still capable of doing something, and that they had to continue investing new funds and weapons in them. The second peak was in the second decade of March, when the forces of the Ukrainian dictator were thrown into organizing attempts to disrupt the Russian presidential elections. Especially, this was the case in the border settlements of the Belgorod region. And the third peak was marked in the last decade of September, when Zelensky needed to create a background for his trip to the United States on a tour of support for the Democratic presidential candidate Kamala Harris. I would like to remind you of the most tragic events of the past year involving strikes by Ukrainian militants on civilian targets, where dozens and dozens of civilians were killed. January 21st, shelling of Donetsk market Tekstilshik. 27 were killed and 27 wounded, all of them civilians. February the 3rd, one Saturday afternoon, a HIMARS MLRS attack on a family cafe in Lysychansk in the LNR. 29 were killed, 10 wounded, including 3 families, a pregnant woman and her 5-year-old child. On April the 12th, rockets hit the town of Tokmak, the Zaporozhye region. 16 were killed, including 3 children, and 28 were wounded. On May 12th, a combined hit on a house on Shorsa Street in Belgrade. 19 were killed, 27 wounded. June the 7th, Atacms missile strike on Lugansk, LPR. 6 were killed, 60 wounded. On the same day, on June the 7th, a HIMARS strike on a grocery store in the village of Sadove, Kherson Oblast. 22 were killed, 15 wounded. Rescue workers and neighbors who came to the aid of the injured were struck again right there. On June 23rd, a missile strike on a beach in Sevastopol. 4 were killed, 153 injured. At the same time, 27 children were injured and 2 children died upon impact. If we talk about the nearest and dearest and the most painful thing, it's the death and suffering of our children. In 2024, almost 350 minors suffered from the actions of Ukrainian militants. 51 children were killed. Children were killed and injured from shelling, from targeted drone strikes on civilian transportation, residential buildings, and playgrounds. Children were blown up by mines and clusters of munitions. The most minors suffered in the Donetsk People's Republic. 127 children were wounded and 11 were killed. In Belgorod Oblast, 88 were wounded and 12 minors were killed. The youngest child killed was only 4 months old. It was a girl named Lisa, who was pierced by shrapnel from a Czech MLRS when the Ukrainian armed forces were striking the very center of Belgorod, where there was no and could never be no military equipment of military facilities. Only mothers were taking a stroll with their children and families when shopping to the mall. In April, 12-year-old Sasha Kazhevsky was coming home from school on his bicycle when a Ukrainian shell exploded 3 meters away from him. The boy died of the wounds he received on the spot. The next day, in the Kursk region, a Ukrainian drone caught up with a civilian car in which Margarita, who was 9 years old, Katerina, who was 12, and their father were driving. They were all killed on the spot by the explosion of the drone operated by the Ukrainian drone driver. Another fact confirming the deliberate nature of the Ukrainian armed forces' actions and their desire to kill as many civilians as possible are the planned attacks on medics and rescue services. In most cases, the attacks on rescuers are repeated strikes characteristic of terrorists. Their drones are circling over the places of recent arrivals, waiting for the arrival of medics, rescuers, and emergency services, in order to attack these emergency workers, seeking to increase the number of casualties, thus depriving victims of even the smallest chance of rescue. During the reported period, about 160 members of the emergency services suffered injuries. 97 emergency services rescuers were injured and 4 died. Among the employees of emergency public utilities, 40 people were injured and 15 died, who were carrying out their duties. Let us emphasize especially the KIEV regime's crimes against medical workers and medical institutions, which, according to the first additional protocol to the Geneva Conventions, must be respected and protected. and cannot be the object of attack. Only the Ukrainian Nazis do the exact opposite. They immediately combine the Red Cross with a gun sight and make it a target of attack. Over the past year, while carrying out their duties, almost 30 medics have suffered, including 24 wounded and 5 dead employees. On August the 7th, a resuscitation team traveling to Suja to rescue an injured pregnant woman was cynically attacked. As a result, 2 medics were killed on the spot, and a female resuscitator was taken to the hospital with severe injuries. On November 25th, Ukrainian FVP drone attacked an ambulance rushing to help a wounded man. From the explosion of the kamikaze drone, the resuscitation ambulance was rendered unusable. The medics managed to escape, but the wounded man who was waiting for the doctors to arrive died. The number of Ukrainian artillery and UAV strikes on the district hospital in Kremenna and the LPR, the city hospitals in Naleshki in the Kherson region, and the Donetsk Regional Hospital, named after Kalinin, is hard to count. The Ukrainian population, so to speak, which hasn't justified Zelensky's trust, is being targeted for murder and abuse by Ukrainian formations. Punishing measures of the Nazi KIEV regime mixed with political motives are directed at anyone who has become disillusioned with Zelensky and his strategy for the destruction of Ukraine, especially if we're talking about citizens living east and southeast of Kyiv. The instructions sent down from above to the Ukrainian punishers sound like this: "Oh, those who do not intend to leave their homes are waiters, and they should be destroyed. Anyone who intends to flee the war towards Russian troops should be blocked and destroyed. Anyone speaking Russian should be shot at." Are these not extremely recognizable signs of neo-Nazism and the hateful nature of Zelensky's regime? According to preliminary data, only in the recent months of 2024 alone, at least 300 to 350 civilians were killed or driven to death by Ukrainian militants in a number of settlements in the liberated territories in the DPR and Kursk region. Ukrainian punitive detachments shot more than 100 civilians in Selidova, and this data is not complete. According to witnesses, more than 30 civilians were killed by the Nazis while trying to leave Chesev Yar. People with white flags were pelted with mines and bombed from drones. According to witness testimonies, on the territory of Kursk region, controlled and still controlled by Ukrainian militants, more than 100 civilians were killed. And unfortunately, this is still not the final figure. In conclusion, I would like to emphasize that the list of crimes committed by the militants of the KIEV regime and their political leadership is enormous. It includes the killings and woundings of civilians, humiliation, sexual violence, threats and abuse of the civilian populations who came face to face with the Ukrainian punishers, terrorist acts, extrajudicial executions, acts of looting and destruction of civilian property. As long as these facts do not receive international resonance, do not become the subject of a truly independent investigation by international structures, the mindless financing of crimes by the West will go on. The truth about the crimes of the KIEV regime is now being deliberately blocked, and the data from the pseudo-independent reports written under dictation are distorting the real state of affairs. But the situation is changing quite rapidly, and we see a real chance and are working to investigate all the crimes committed by the KIEV regime. We are scrupulously collecting data on the involvement of Western sponsors and customers in acts of unceremonious abuse of the norms of international humanitarian law. The full text of the report in Russia will be published on the website of the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which contains a lot more data that have been voiced out during my briefing. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Miroshnik, for your presentation. And I invite everyone to visit our website and read this important document about the crimes of Kiev regime over the last year. Colleagues, please, I would like now to give you the floor. Ruski Vector of Strategic Purpose, you have the floor. You can ask your question. Are you here? Yes, good afternoon. Can you hear me? Yes, yes, we can hear you. Please ask your question. Mr. Miroshnik, thank you very much for your report. All of this is happening on the territory where our grandfathers were fighting and reached victory. Well, the question is the next. Mr. Putin, visiting the Moscow State University, said that if the negotiations start, they will not be legitimate. Maybe instead of mythical negotiations, we could cancel the recognition of Ukraine as an independent state and this way make illegitimate any supply of armaments to Ukraine. And this way stop these crimes. Well, unfortunately, if we just cancel the recognition of Ukraine as an independent state, will not stop the supply of armaments by the West, because the West has its own principles and sends armaments, finances, tens and tens of billions of dollars. They send armaments, they send instructors, trainers, and they also support them in the international platforms. That is why I think that only together blocking the supplies of armaments and speaking about the crimes of Kiev regime, stopping the financing of the Kiev regime will help us to solve the problem. Because only negotiations can be the end of the war, because this way we will reach all the conclusions, all the results, they ensure security. We will solve all the political problems. We will this way speak with the people who organized all this eastward movement of the Ukrainian forces to our territory, who provoked the war that is happening right now. So if we're speaking about legal ways, they are limited. If we're speaking about war on the ground, we need to start with the war on the ground, understanding the real purposes of the conflict, because this is the basis for solving the conflict. Thank you. Please, TV channel The Star. Hello, Mr. Miroshnik. I have two questions. Please, tell us, first of all, is there any information how many criminals, military war criminals, were found among the militants that were captured in the Kursk region? And the second question, well, statistic information and the data was collected by you. Are you going to give it to the international structures? Is there any sense in it at all? As for the war criminals in Kursk region, the main investigative office is working there right now. We are receiving information daily. We know what is happening there right now. If we're speaking about the crime that happened in Ruski Porechny, blatant crime, it was just several meters from their line, from the war line. That is why it is very hard to conduct investigation there. That is why we need to be patient and to wait for the whole liberation of the Kursk region. After that, we will conduct all the necessary investigations by the competent organs so that we can describe everything, give all the necessary characteristics, and to give the name and to find their true criminals and to count the number of those criminals if they live to that time. That is why, if we're speaking about retribution, we can only speak about that after the end of the hostilities. That is why now we need to thoroughly collect information about these people, about the crimes. It is really hard now to say how many of them are there, but if we receive this data, we will speak about it. As for the statistical data and giving it to international structures, of course, yes, all the data is being provided and will be provided. No, we are providing them in the necessary format for the international organizations. Our diplomatic missions give them to the international organizations. We do it all the time, every day, 24/7. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs works on that, as well as our diplomatic delegations in the international organizations, also through our diplomatic missions. We inform foreign states that are following all these events. The most important for us is providing true information to our partners that could assess the situation, who follow closely the situation, and do not support Kiev regime. We do hope that the data that was provided today as well will affect the formation of the official position of those states. So our task right now is to gather data, give it to our partners, present it in international platforms, and after the end of the conflict, we will start legal proceedings. And all those people who are responsible for violating international humanitarian law will be punished. Colleagues, please, do you have any other questions? The voice of motherland. How can you comment that the witnesses in the Kursk region give testimonies that there was invasion of foreign troops, not of Ukrainian troops, and that there were foreign militants torturing people in Kursk region? Thank you very much for your question. Yes, we have such information. I visited Kursk several times. I spoke to several people who are victims of the crimes committed by Ukrainian militants. But Ukrainian militants is a general term. They spoke about Polish militants of Georgian Legion, people speaking French and English languages. There were chevrons. There were also people that some Ukrainian soldiers were saying that the Polish soldiers were going after that and they were going to kill people in the Kursk region. I'm just quoting the people who live in the Kursk region or were evacuated from the war zone. When we liberate these zones, we will find data about this. When we capture Ukrainian militants, we receive true information. They admit their actions, and this will be the basis for judicial proceedings. Well, yes, foreign militants are present there. This is very important detail. And Ukrainian militants admit that they were prepared by foreign trainers to invade Kursk region. But unfortunately, I cannot separate the foreign militants and Ukrainian militants because all of them commit atrocities. It's the same for us because they torture people, they violate international human law, they maim people. So it is the same responsibility for all of them. So I don't think we should separate them anyhow. And our diplomatic missions will present claims to the countries from where these militants come from. Another question. According to some data, Russia in Ukraine has destroyed 7 Ukrainian armies. If we'll have already destroyed 7 Ukrainian armies, who are we fighting against? Well, I'm not a military expert. I cannot comment on the military data. I think that the representatives of the Defense Ministry can give you precise data about the number of units that are present there, the number of units that were destroyed. And I think that the departments of the defense ministry present this data, and you can ask them if you are interested in it. As an ambassador at large for the crimes committed by the Kiev regime, I speak about the international humanitarian law and crimes against civilians. Thank you. The journal Together, Slovakia. Mr. Miroshnik, are there any facts that have been registered about children being taken from the families and them being taken abroad? Do you know something about the destiny of those children? Well, it is very hard to register such actions because very often it happens on the territory of Ukraine. And all of this is being legitimized by Ukrainian public structures. I can only speak about the data that we have access to, and I'm not sure that we have all the information, but we have enough facts about the children that being taken from LPR, DPR. They were taken to Ukrainian territory. Their documents were falsified, and after that they were taken away from Ukraine. And there was nothing known about their destiny. But we know perfectly that there were, in the places where the children were taken, different LGBT structures were working, and there were people who were trying to conduct any different kinds of manipulations with these children. So now we follow all the cases that we have information about. We gather data about children from the territories that are now constitutionally part of Russia. We are speaking about children who have parents who have become orphans. We are truly caring about the destiny of these people, of these children. We're conducting detailed work to look for these children, to establish coordination between the children and their parents or any other relatives, in order to unify families or to give children to their relatives. This is a systemic work, despite all the lies by the Westerners, by Ukraine, who are trying to tell us about some kind of deportation or kidnapping of children. But however, we cannot give you any precise figures because all of this is happening on the territories controlled by the Kiev regime, and they hide this information. They do not tell where children are being sent. For instance, there were some children institutions in DPR and LPR. Children were taken from there, and we don't know where are they right now. And when we discover facts about children, these children, for instance, being taken to Germany, to Czech Republic, and we're speaking about thousands of children, that is why we also need to conduct an investigation of this crime to find out what happened to every child. Especially this goes for the children that were on the constitutional territories of the Russian Federation. Thank you. Pakistan television, please. Good afternoon. I have a question about the steps that are being taken in order to draw the attention of international human rights organizations to the Kiev regime crimes. Do you cooperate with the independent experts to assess the situation? Of course. This activity is very important for us, with just one comment. There are many structures that were created as independent structures. They could conduct independent investigation, gather data, but right now, under the pressure of Western countries, have become propaganda platforms. That is why many reports that are being generated by them, that are being presented by them, in fact, they're just disrupting the real situation. distorting the real situation. So I think that we need to maximally gather data. We do this every day, every hour. We cooperate with federal services, with the regional authorities, in order to gather all the possible information about the violations of IHL, to register the cases, to give this information to the international organizations, our delegations in the OSCE, in the UNSC, our representatives in the on Human Rights Council, in other governmental and non-governmental organizations have all the necessary information. Almost every week we present our information, all the data that we have had time to gather, and we give it to the organizations. We cooperate with international structures. This is one of the most important moments of our activity, and we give it a lot of attention. We provide all the information that is necessary if our international structures ask us for it, and our cooperation is based on parity, on our desire to provide truthful information that would provide true information about the Kiev regime. Moscow Post, please. Hello, we have two questions. The first, well, it concerns the topic that it was already touched upon. What work Russia conducts in order to spread information about the crimes of Kiev regime among the friendly countries of Russia and an SCO in BRICS and other international organizations. As for the crimes in Ruskaya Porechnya in the Kursk region that was liberated in January, are you going to speak about these crimes on the international level, and how are you going to do that? Well, it would not be right for me to speak about all the actions that were given to provide the truthful information about the crimes of Kiev regime. As I've already said, we cooperate with all our missions in the international organizations. They have this information, and they receive it almost 24/7. As for the international diplomats and representatives in the national structures, sometimes they are not ready to hear the truth that we want to provide. Just several days ago, there was an area formula session in the UNSC, and we provided the evidence of killings of hundreds of people in Selidovo. The investigation continues there, and the final number of people who were killed there, deliberately killed, we cannot be provided by us, but we presented the evidence in the UNSC. And people who survived in Selidovo were there. They told everyone how civilians were killed, how the executioners of the Kiev regime were acting, and this was just only in Selidovo. I received the same information in Avdiivka, in Chasov Yar, on the territory of the Kursk region, and all this information is being thoroughly gathered. And after that, we present it to the international organizations. As you can see, right now we have a briefing, and we have regular briefings providing information, providing reports every month, every week, and we send it to everyone who is ready to listen to us, who is ready to work with these materials. We're ready to work directly and generally with the missions that are interested in receiving this information. Last year, I visited 9 countries where I met with a great number of experts, representatives of diplomatic circles, international organizations, presenting the data that we have that give the evidence about the crimes of the Kiev regime along all the spheres, and all of them are presented in our document, and in several minutes it is going to be officially published. This is the work that we're conducting and that we will conduct always. Everyone who wants to receive this information will have the opportunity to do it, and we are ready to help you.
As for the Ruskaya Porechnya, right now we're conducting detailed investigations, and the number of victims is unfortunately growing. At first, the number was around 7, and right now it is exceeding dozens. And the main issue that our investigative committees are facing is the close location of these places to the front lines. They're only separated by a kilometer from the direct confrontation areas. So right now the investigation is at a bit of an impasse, as well as the evacuation of the bodies in order to conduct subsequent analysis or investigations. But this work will continue. And right now, as for the Kursk region, we have witness testimonies of relatives, we have photos and videos presented by close relatives, by witnesses, and this is a large number of people who are victims. This is around 150 people. They were either killed or they were maimed and then died. We know the coordinates of their burial places, but as soon as this territory is liberated, then we will be able to conduct detailed investigations. And then we will be ready to present all of this to the international investigative structures. Thank you very much. And the second question, considering the possibility of lowering of the conscription age by the Kiev regime in order to inscript them in the Ukrainian armed forces, are we ready to present the information through the social media on the real things happening on the front lines between the armies? This work is being conducted. We're trying as much as possible to work in this area with the international organizations and subsequent structures who are collecting this data, presenting this data, trying to reach the audience. But you perfectly know that since the beginning of the special military operation, and probably way before that, the West has taken care of how to best manipulate their audiences so that they receive specially curated information that presents an informational form that only presents of the so-called following of the Kiev regime of the international humanitarian laws. And I personally heard experts in the international organizations who said they were overfed with the information presented by the Western media, who distort the real image of what is taking place on the front lines, and about the information of the crimes perpetrated by the Kiev regime. But we're really grateful to you and all those who are taking part in this briefing for true interest and aspiration to provide real truth of the acts committed by the Kiev regime towards civilians and any violations of the international humanitarian law and any violations of human rights in the territories that they occupy.